Welcome back to another episode of SheSpeaks, where we spotlight women driving innovation, leadership, and transformation in tech and beyond. Today, I'm joined by the incredible Meri Williams, a powerhouse in tech leadership and one of the most respected voices in engineering today. Currently CTO at Pleo, Meri's led some of the most recognizable tech organizations across the UK and beyond, from scaling Monzo's platform during its explosive growth to driving innovation at Healx. And, they have a background in spanning government, fintech, e-commerce, medtech, and more. And their ability to lead diverse, high-performing teams in complex environments is unmatched. But what truly sets Meri apart is how much they give back. As the curator and host of the Lead Developer Conference, a seasoned board advisor and author of the Principles of Project Management, they've shaped not just organizations, but the conversations around what great leadership looks like in tech. And in this episode, we'll talk about approaches to diversity, mentorship and sponsorship, how to build inclusive environments, and why diversity, especially in senior roles, matters more than ever. So, Meri, welcome to the podcast. It's so nice to have you on today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So, for those who may not know you, could you start by telling us a bit more about your career journey so far?
Sure. So I'm South African originally, despite my adoption of my wife's very British accent at this point. I came to the UK to study and failed to go home. I studied computer science at the University of Bath. And then I spent the first 10 years of my career at Procter & Gamble. So I did a bunch of different roles there, ranging from kind of engineering and architecture to product and project and program management. And then ran all of North European operations towards the end of my time there. I loved P&G and really enjoyed it there, but realized it was a little far away from the tech that I loved, or the cutting edge tech that I loved. And so I left after 10 years. And I was going to go to either Google or Amazon, and then I got a phone call from a guy called Tom Loosemore who said, we're going to fix government, come help us do that instead. And he then rang my friends and got them to convince me that this was like a once in a lifetime thing, which it genuinely was. So I joined the government digital service and scaled up the team that built gov.uk. So we went from 30 to 300 people in just under 9 months, which was a ridiculous amount of scaling. I wouldn't do a 10x again. And then from then, I have done quite a variety of things. So I ended up as CTO for M&S.com, then for Moo, then for Monzo, then Healx, which was AI-driven drug discovery, and I'm at Pleo since November 2022, so just about 2.5 years now.
I think that individual put the hunting into headhunting when he was trying to get you on board by the sounds of it. So you've worked, like you've just mentioned, you've worked across these different industries. So, I do wonder, how have these experiences shaped you as a leader?
I think the difference in environment has been really interesting. So somewhere like P&G was this really, really comprehensive and well-developed leadership environment. And I think I got a lot out of being in that environment early in my career. So really got to see what running a good company in a good way looks like. Government was really interesting, but ultimately not where I felt most at home. It turns out, quite like there being a single North Star of profit, which is really helpful in a lot of companies. Having to care what ministers thought wasn't really something I was well adapted to. And then I think the other thing I learned along the way was just how much the domain context matters. Something like e-commerce is really easy to get your head around. I mean, there's obviously some nuances to it, but it's broadly very understandable because we all buy stuff online and we're all used to that sort of online shopping paradigm. But learning fintech and learning drug discovery was really different. So lots of depth, lots of understanding the regulator and the regulations and that kind of that governance environment around it, super different. And so I think by changing quite a bit, I've learned to go deep quite fast and to learn the different domains in a lot of detail very quickly has been something that's been fairly essential for my career.
And when you're building those teams in those various different roles, how, what's your approach to leadership when doing that?
Um, so I have a favorite management book. It's called First Break All the Rules, and it has these. The core of the book is these 12 questions that predict high performing teams. And 12 questions is a lot to memorize, and even after all these years, I'm not sure I know them off by heart. And so there's another book I really like called Drive by Dan Pink, which is basically a summary of all the science of motivation in terms of how we understand the psychology of motivation, what makes people happy to get up on a Monday morning and be going to work. And in Drive, Dan Pink says there's three core things: purpose, believing in why; autonomy, having a say in what; and then mastery, being proud of how you do what you do, and feeling like you're getting better at your specialism. And then I think I would add a fourth thing, which is inclusion. And so that's broadly how I lead teams, is I try to make sure that the why is always understandable and visible for people and their work connects to that overall purpose. I try to consult people quite well, give them some opportunity to input into what we do and how we do it. And then a lot of those 12 questions, like the majority of them actually, are about mastery. So people need to feel that they're getting better at what they do. They need to feel like they're proficient and that they're improving. And then finally, the people need to feel that they can be themselves and be successful. And I think that's where the inclusion aspect comes in. And so I'm constantly paying attention to those four things. And I've probably had quite a range of roles in terms of which was the biggest problem at the point that I joined. So some places the purpose was super clear. The government digital service, everybody knew we were trying to make better services for citizens and other people in the UK. And so the purpose was like a big tick. Everybody knew why we were there and what we were doing. Autonomy in the civil service wasn't such a big tick. It wasn't easy to give people the opportunity to shape the work that they were doing. And mastery was also a challenge in that environment. Whereas I've been in other environments where the autonomy was great, the mastery was great, but maybe people didn't understand the purpose of the organization or didn't believe in the purpose of the organization. And so I think it's a little bit about, it's a useful framework, but then actually applying it is about understanding the specifics of the particular organization that you're joining or being a part of, and adapting and focusing on different things.
Yeah, I think with the inclusion side of things, just that one thing almost feels like it might encompass, I don't know if you know Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Yeah.
something that has to be satisfied from the bottom up. It almost kind of brings in that kind of human element to those questions, doesn't it? Really, and that's really, really important. I studied it when I studied HR. So, yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think that's really, really important. And, in terms of even like, I guess, finding meaning in your day-to-day job, because I think that's something we touched on, didn't we? And what does that look like for you personally?
So I'm someone who finds meaning at quite a high level. So I like there to be, that we're making people's lives better in some way. I do know some people who, like, if they don't feel like they're saving lives or the planet, then they're not interested. And so some people have a very, very high attachment to purpose and really need it to be a very kind of honourable purpose in order to feel attached to it. Equally, I've worked with people who were very, very purpose inspired, but what it meant for them was that their work was useful to their colleagues. And so I think that there's all these different elevations that you can connect with purpose on. And so sometimes it's this really big idea about how, saving lives, changing lives. Sometimes it's, the product that you work on is useful to people. Sometimes it's that the work you do is useful to some of your colleagues. Sometimes it's just good enough to make a difference in one person's day, right? I think people connect to purpose at all these different elevations. And it's actually one of the things I most enjoy about people management is helping someone figure out what altitude their connection to purpose is at, and what kind of things matter to them and what kind of things maybe don't matter so much.
Yeah, and from what you say, it's the common denominator here is just to be useful in some way.
Yeah. I
right?
mean, but I do think that there are people who genuinely are like, my wife's an architect, she builds hospitals. And so genuinely like saving and changing lives is something that inspires her. And I don't think she would be as inspired or feel as connected to the purpose of the organization if she was working on houses or office blocks, right? Or prisons, for instance. It really matters to her that she's working on healthcare. And I think that there are people who are like that. And I think it's perfectly valid to be like that. There are people who want to work in medical and health and environmental and charity sector and those kind of things. And so I think it depends a little bit on how you're wired, which aspect of purpose is going to matter the most to you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, gosh, this is getting personal, but one of the things that my father always taught me was the importance of having purpose no matter what it looked like, because it's going to look very different to every single individual. And that's actually one of the things that always stuck with me. So I had to ask myself every single time, well, what's the purpose of this? And actually, when I didn't listen to that voice in my head, I ended up in situations that weren't the most ideal for me.
Yeah,
And when it's not ideal for me, it's not ideal for anyone else around me. I think it will kind of like, does add on. But we talked a little bit about practical diversity as well with you. What are some of the most impactful steps individuals or companies can take to create real change?
yeah. So I have a framework I use, which is three questions that I think people are asking themselves, whether they're actively aware of it or not. And those are, am I expected here? So is there evidence that people like me are even expected to be at this company? Am I respected here? Are my differences going to be seen as a feature or a bug? And then can I be myself and be successful? And that last one's really important because when people feel like they have to pretend to be something they're not, it takes a lot of energy. Whether that's because you're autistic and masking, you're a person of color and you're code switching, whether it's that you're a woman who feels like you have to act like a man in order to succeed, whether you're LGBTQ and you have to pretend not to be at work. Stonewall did some research about 20 years ago that said people could be 40% more productive if they could be themselves at work. And that's a really significant thing. Like if you could get 2 extra days a week of productivity, that's massive, right? And so I think that what people can do is use a framework like that to assess their current organization. So I have run out of the number of tech startups in London who come to me and they're like, I just don't understand why we can't hire any women developers. And then you look at their website and the only benefits they've got listed are like foosball Fridays and beer Wednesdays. And you're like, well, is it really that surprising? Everything you're telling people who you are and they're listening to you. And so I think the kind of am I expected here is about everything from the photos on your website of your team through to the way that you talk about the roles that you post and even the language that you use when you're writing your job descriptions is really important. So one practical thing people can do is use something like the gender decoder that Cat Matfield open sourced to check how gendered the language is in the job descriptions that they write. There's a tendency to write these kind of rock star particularly for engineers, this kind of like rock star 10x engineers, you've got to be awesome. And just reality is there's very few people who are in any kind of underrepresented group that have that level of arrogance. And so people end up accidentally optimizing for arrogance, which isn't actually great, doesn't do you well when you're building your team. In terms of the kind of will I be respected here, a lot of that is about training people in unconscious bias, but not just training them that unconscious bias exists, but how to combat it. Because one of the unfortunate side effects of all the unconscious bias training we've seen in the industry is people now just accept that there is bias and they just kind of go, oh yeah, but bias is just a thing. And the point wasn't to accept it, the point was to fight against it. And so we have to realize that, if you're um, calling women you work with girls, or even these tiny little things like asking somebody where they're from or where they're really from if they're a person of color. These microaggressions are like mosquito bites, right? One or two isn't a problem, but for the people experiencing them, they're getting bitten hundreds of times a day. And so these little things add up. And of course, there's also the much worse behavior, there's actual sexism and homophobia and racism. And so you've got to eradicate that from your organization. You have to have a zero tolerance approach to it. And then on the final piece of like, can I be myself and be successful here? I think the most important practical step is role modeling. So if you have a leadership team that all looks the same, sounds the same, dresses the same, I've had leadership teams that look like they were probably wearing matching underwear to go with their matching ties. And it's very difficult to look at a group that's that homogenous and go, oh yeah, loads of different people could succeed in this organization. It's very obviously one type of person who can succeed because they are all the same at the top of the organization. And so I think it's really valuable for leaders to show who they really are, and for there to be a diversity amongst leaders in terms of their circumstances, their home lives, their hobbies, and how they spend their time. And so I think that there's something to this sort of authenticity of leadership, to show who you really are and to be who you really are at work, rather than spending all your time pretending. And obviously be the best, most professional version of who you are. I'm not suggesting that we all like plummet in our pajamas all day at work, fun though that might be. But I think that there's you can be real, and that can be valuable to show people that the real you is succeeding, not just the sanitized, looks like everybody else version of you.
I know we kind of briefly talked about kind of mentoring, and you'd brought up the whole idea of sponsorship, which we'll kind of go more into. But because you've talked about unconscious bias, how do you think that plays a big role in kind of who gets sponsored? And, as a leader, like how do you become more intentional and inclusive in their advocacy?
Yeah, I think a lot of people just mentor and sponsor people who are just like them. It's very easy to spot someone and go, you remind me of a younger me, let me help you. And it's not necessarily wrong to do that, right? It's understandable, it's very human, but it's not helping the industry very much because we already we're overrepresented in terms of straight white dudes, in leadership roles. The quota has been filled. If there were ever a quota, it has been more than filled. We are way, 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 way overrepresented, in folks from that demographic. And so I think that leaders need to actively combat their tendency to choose people who remind themselves of themselves, and instead find brilliance in people who are quite different from them. And that's a little bit harder, and it's a little more work, but I think it's work that pays off. And you're right. We talked before the podcast about sponsorship and mentoring and coaching and similar. And I think the key definition it's important for people to hear is mentoring is giving advice. It's sharing your experience and saying, if I were in your situation, this is what I would do. And mentoring is useful, but it relies on you being similar enough to the person that you're mentoring that they can safely take your advice. And very often, if you have men mentoring women, for instance, women are going to be reacted to very differently than men if they do exactly the same thing. Same words, same actions, interpreted very differently. There's a famous example from, I forget whether it's Harvard Business School or one of the others, but anyway, a classroom is given two case studies, John and Jane, and asked to summarize the leadership styles of the two. And the summary of John is, he's a great leader, you'd follow him anywhere, of course he's in charge of the team. And the summary of Jane is, she gets it done, but what a bitch. And it turns out it's the same case study. They just changed the names and the pronouns. And the analysis is so different because the context is so different. And so the thing with mentoring is to make sure that you either are similar enough to the person that you can give them good advice, or that you take more of a coaching approach. So you're helping them figure out what they want to do rather than just telling them what you would do. And then sponsorship is a totally different thing, which is sponsorship is what happens when the person is not in the room. Sponsorship is going, I know who's the right person for this big project that's coming up. It's saying, it's choosing people who are not just the usual suspects or the people who look like you and sound like you and act like you, but saying, who do we give this opportunity to, and how do we give them an opportunity in a way that has a safety net? Because there's this thing called the glass cliff, like the glass ceiling, but the glass cliff is the thing that you're shoved off when you're given far too big a challenge without any support, which doesn't happen to everybody. It tends to happen to underrepresented groups more than anybody else. And so I think that with sponsorship, we both want people to get better at actively sponsoring folks who are different and who would add something new to the leadership layer, and also making sure that they give not just the sponsorship but also the support.
Yeah, I think mentoring is something most people can do, but I think sponsoring someone is going above and beyond. Shouldn't be. It should be a standard thing that everyone does, but don't do. So until it becomes quite normal, I think it's just at that stage of going above and beyond, and I don't think people want to put in that effort, or just kind of almost maybe treating it a bit like a tick box exercise. I think most of the time. But I know that, talking about underrepresented groups, you've shared that, you're neurodiverse, I'm neurodiverse, and, you're diagnosed with ADHD as an adult. And we talked about how, yeah, did you go through this? Did you go through that? And it just seems like a common experience. But how has that kind of shaped your perspective in the workplace?
So I got my ADHD and my autism diagnosis about 5, 6 years ago, and on the one hand, it was a big relief because it just told me I wasn't broken, I was just different. And I think that was a real change for me, because I'd felt wrong for a long time. So it really helped to have this perspective that it was an actual difference in my brain that I could rely on, that was to some extent predictable and to some extent a shared experience. And so I think that it's been really helpful in me not hating myself so much, really honestly. I think I used to beat myself up a lot for the ways I was different. And then it's obviously helped to have the diagnosis because I've managed to get some help with some of it. So I'm on ADHD meds. I'm on some medication that helps with the autism, some aspects of the autism as well. And it helped me to know that neurodiverse people have sometimes up to 50% lower production of melatonin. It's why we struggle with sleep so much. And so I take melatonin at night as well now, and sleep immensely better than I used to, which obviously helps you be calmer, helps you be healthier, and just having good sleep is a totally new thing for me. I had 30 plus years of my life with pretty bad sleep, and so it was really good to get that fixed. And then I think it's also helped me to organize my work better. People who are neurodiverse tend to be more, particularly ADHD, tend to be more motivated by urgency than importance. And so deadlines matter and tend to activate the like, oh shit, got to get it done part of our brains. But importance doesn't. Novelty and urgency do. And so understanding that has meant I'm much better at making sure people give me clear deadlines when they exist, that I'm open with people that I'm going to do better if there is a clear deadline as well. And then part of why I do so many different things in addition to a day job is so that something's always urgent. And that makes me very productive.
I relate to this so hard. I've recently had a chat with my boss, Guy, and I said to him, Guy, I thrive on pressure. So give me deadlines, do this. It's not a bad thing. If it's too much, I'll let you know. But I just thrive on that. I do really well in that kind of pressured environment. Don't ask me why. It's a long story. And bless him, he was very responsive. So that was really helpful. And it's always, I've actually had great leaders who've done that to me, who've done that for me and been very accommodating. So I've been quite lucky in that sense. But I know that with a lot of tech companies, that's not always going to be the case. Especially, I think there's a lot of women, like I masked a lot of my symptoms so you couldn't tell. That's why, women tend to get later diagnosis. And with that in mind, is being yourself, it's difficult. You see, the idea of being yourself, I think women find it especially more difficult in the workplace. But how do you think companies can actually better support neurodiverse professionals in like meaningful, in practical ways?
Yeah. So we were actually just discussing this. We have an active community at Pleo called Scatterbrains, which is our neurodiverse community. And I was saying I was going to write some guidance for for managers on how to manage neurodiverse people better. And what we kind of collectively agreed on was written instructions are really helpful in addition to verbal, clear deadlines, being open about there being ups and downs in our energy levels, and so not expecting huge, like, measure us on the results rather than on the effort. The consistency may not be there, but the results will be there. We also talked about making sure that there are agendas for meetings, not putting quick catch-up meetings in at no notice with no context, because that's very stressful for folks to just see a meeting appear that they don't have any understanding of what it's for. Their imaginations tend to run a little bit wild. And yeah, those kind of things, which are all quite simple and very honestly are likely to help other people as well, right? It's not something that you do just for the neurodiverse people in your team. It helps everybody to have an agenda for the meeting. It helps everybody to have written instructions to go with the verbal instructions. It means that there's no lack of clarity on what needs to get done, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Who doesn't want more information? I think the more information, the merrier, the less likely you're going to get anything done wrong, in a wrong way. So you've also kind of you've been very open and honest about multiple facets of your identity in this conversation, our prior conversation. So what would you say to other leaders who may be hesitant to show up as their full selves?
I mean, I've been surprised. I shouldn't have been, but I have been surprised by how many people it really matters to. I get comments all the time from folks about how they really appreciate seeing somebody who's visibly queer, visibly disabled, visibly or not visibly neurodiverse maybe, but open about being neurodiverse, and those kind of things. And there's a real truth to the saying, if you can't see it, you can't be it. It's very easy to look at leadership and only see one type of leader. And a lot of organizations just have one type of leader. And so if you're in any way different from that kind of stereotype, then it's really valuable for people to see you for who you are. And it's really, surprisingly rewarding as well to put yourself out there a little bit and be a little bit more open.
When I joined the company, it was ADHD Awareness Month, and that's actually the first time I became quite open about. I've always been quite unapologetically open because, for me, I'm just like, I found out, I know how to deal with it. It's a superpower now. That's how I'm going to view things. And, I've just that to actually write up my story. And I was very honest about how it affected me, how it affects my day to day. Someone actually reached out to my colleague to say, whoever wrote this, I think I'd done it anonymously, said, whoever wrote this, thank you so much. And he was autistic, and he said, I actually feel so much better reading about this experience. But it was just, it's not so much about how it made me feel. It was just, I realized how important it was to actually be open and honest about it. To make it known that actually this is just another way of thinking, another way of being. And there are so many people like this, but they're just not talking about it. So yeah, and I appreciate how open and honest you've been as well. It's so lovely to see, really encouraging. You've kind of mentored people as well at different stages of their career. What do you think senior leaders in particular benefit from when it comes to mentorship?
I mean, I think it's great to be mentored, but it's also great to be a mentor. I think talking through things helps you understand your own experience better. In the same way as if you can teach something, I think you really, really understand it. And so I think for senior leaders, there's this concept of Lara Hogan calls it the manager Voltron, that like if you can't have the perfect manager, you can collect up pieces of different people and by their power combined have a really great manager or a really great mentor. And I've definitely taken that kind of approach. So I've got different people who I would talk to about different things, and I encourage the people who I mentor to have more than just me as well. I think they need to have a little panel of mentors that they can talk to about different challenges and so on. But I think that at senior levels in particular, you tend to start learning just as much from the people you're mentoring as you are from the people who are mentoring you. I think it becomes very bidirectional very fast when you're senior.
Yeah. I went for a period of like watching a lot of podcasts, and one of the ones I followed at the time was called The Mindset Mentor. And I do remember he said, I don't know if you know him, but I do remember he said that he had a mentor for everything. Not just one kind of mentor, but absolutely for everything, different areas of his life. He had a mentor for that. And he said that's the way forward if that's what you're looking for. Obviously, it's not always easy to find that, but if you can and if you have the means to, I think what a brilliant idea. In terms of kind of, becoming a mentor, because you've experienced it, you've done it, what kind of advice would you give to someone who's just kind of starting on that journey?
I think a lot of mentoring is just sharing your experience, so anybody can do it. Just be aware of whether your experience is like immediately applicable to the person. Are they similar enough to you? Are they in a similar enough situation? And the main advice I would give people who want to be great mentors is to become great coaches as well. So learn something like the GROW coaching technique, which is goal, reality, options, and will. And you basically start by just going, what's the goal? What do you want to talk about? What's the reality of the situation? You then help them generate as many options as they can think of. So you want like 12, 20 options of things that they could do. And then the last stage will is to just go, okay, what are you actually going to do? Which thing are you committing to yourself that you're going to go and do? Because if you can coach, then you can help people find their own way to do things rather than just telling them how you would do it.
We, I guess, talked a lot about the mentoring side of things, but in terms of hiring and team building, back to kind of that area, what major shifts do you see coming in how we approach leadership and team building, hiring in tech?
I think we've already seen a lot of the change happen. We're less directive now and more about coaching teams to success. I think this kind of purpose, autonomy, mastery, and inclusion equation matters a lot. And then I think that when you're hiring, we're increasingly needing to ask the question, not does this person fit with our culture, but what will they add to our culture? And so I think interviewing for culture add rather than culture fit is really important. You want to have every single person who joins the team add something new, whether that's a different lived experience, a different point of view, a different academic background, a different anything. But how are they going to add to your culture? Obviously, they need to fit with your culture to some extent. You don't want somebody who's going to come in and just cause trauma left, right, and center. But you want them to be more than just a fit. You want them to be an addition.
And if you could change, I guess, one thing in the tech industry today, what would that be?
It really frustrates me that we act as if we have to start over with 1920s style factory management and like iterate our way from there. I wish that we as an industry would look at other industries and schools of thought and areas of research more. I think there's 100 years of management science that you can learn from, and ignoring it is not very sensible. And so I wish the tech industry would just stop imagining that it has to reinvent everything and sometimes steal and reapply better.
I feel like we've talked about AI in every single podcast so far, and we haven't in this podcast, in this particular episode. Let's talk about AI, Meri. Your thoughts?
I'm from an AI background, so I probably have more realistic thoughts than a lot of people. I think LLMs are fantastic. I think they're really interesting, but they're limited in what they can do. They can't really reason. They can't really think. And one of the challenges I think right now is that they sound like a very erudite person, and so we assume that they are as clever as a very erudite person, and they're not. Fundamentally. And so I think that they're going to be very useful. They're going to be transformative for a lot of the way work gets done. But people imagining that you can replace loads of humans with AI, it's a long way off. It's a long, long way off because they hallucinate so easily. They are very, very, very fancy autocomplete. That's what they are. And it's very easy to imagine that they're a lot more than that, but hard to make it real.
I use ChatGPT just for very low scale projects and things like that. And I found the only way it really helps is just to help me build a skeleton on which I build in a very human way anyway. If I ask it to build something from scratch, it just doesn't sound very good. So I'm finding myself changing a lot, just gets to a point where it's frustrating, but it has been very useful as well. It's definitely cut down the amount of time I spend on tasks. So I do agree with that. And, what gives you the most hope for the future of inclusive leadership and diverse teams in tech?
I mean, I think the fact that the research supports it massively, like
Yeah.
diverse teams outperform homogenous teams on literally every aspect. If you have a more diverse board, your company's more likely to be more profitable. If you have a more diverse team, they're going to be more innovative. They're going to get more patents. If you have any kind of one of the things I think people get wrong is they imagine that it's easy to have a diverse team, but actually it's hard. And it being hard is the entire point. It's hard to take a group of people who are very different and have different perspectives and experiences and get them to agree on the way forward. What happens when you're in that situation? You have to rely on data more, you have to rely on analysis more, and you have to talk things out more. And so I think you end up with better decisions because you've had that difference and it's been more difficult to come to a decision. But people don't always want to put the effort in to make it worthwhile. But the benefits are immense, like really, really, really significant. And so I'm at a point now where I don't even care about the teams who don't want to be diverse. They're going to go the way of the dinosaurs. They're just going to die off because they can't compete with the teams that are. And so I only help people who are actively trying to make their teams better now, because the people who need convincing to, like, try having a woman on your team, try having a person of color on your team, like, they are not worth the effort. They're going to fail and die. So I just don't care about them anymore. I focus on the teams that already realize that you need diversity to survive.
I fear the process of death is already taking place.
Yeah.
If you could share one piece, I guess this is the final thing I'll ask. There is one piece of advice you'd give with your younger self starting out in leadership, what would that be?
So the best career advice I ever got was figure out what you can't stop yourself from doing. Not figure out what you love, not figure out, none of that. What can't you let anybody else do? What can't you stop yourself from doing? And then double down on that.
Interesting. I like this. I've never heard anything from that perspective. Yeah, thinking about life. That's interesting. I shall apply that to my life and let you know how it goes, Mary. But so far, I think I found what I really love doing in my recruitment career, and that's what I really enjoy and I look forward to. And, with your listeners, you've got ways that people can connect with you. Would you like to let our listeners know how they can follow your work, or where would you like to them to connect with
So,
you online?
so I'm not really on Twitter anymore because it's a cesspool now. I'm on LinkedIn. If you search for Meri Williams, Meri, then you'll find me pretty easily, and that's a decent place to follow me. And yeah, I'm giving a talk at Lead Dev London next week, all about how we need to develop engineers differently in the modern reality of AI-driven coding.
Would they be able to watch you online with that as well?
It'll be published afterwards, so a couple of weeks.
Amazing. But thank you so much again, Mary, for sharing all your wisdom. It's been such a lovely, lovely episode, learning so much from you.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.